Hey everybody in Humanities 107. Hope the past week has treated you well. And sorry for being a little bit behind schedule when it comes to uploading the videos here. My other job kept me busy the past couple of days here. Well, job and kids kept me busy. So I haven't quite had the time to pop in front of the camera, but here now, and I should get this uploaded probably right as the Zoom meeting for our class starts at 2 p.m. today. So good to be talking with everybody again, and slight apologies for the slight delay there. Did want to just mention class related stuff really quickly. It seems like everybody's been doing pretty well keeping up with the discussion boards. I've enjoyed reading through those. I'm going to be going through this past week's in just a moment here, so make sure you're keeping up on that this week and next week, and then that'll be the end of the that phase of the class here. I did want to mention as well that your final essay prompt is up on Brightspace. I uploaded that last week, so make sure you've taken a good look at that, have started picking out the topic that you want to write about, thinking about how you want to analyze the subject of your essay, all of these sorts of things. I tried to leave this essay as open as possible, just because of how disrupted, I should say, the course has been. But if you have any questions, if it was maybe a little too open ended for you, please do reach out to me through email or through Zoom. I will do my best to clarify what I'm looking for and what the essay is all about. All right. All of that being said, and the last thing is we will have a final exam that you'll take on Brightspace, just like you did for the midterm. It's weird to remember the midterm was like right before the lockdown happened. It's a whole different world a month and a half later. But we will probably, I'm leaning towards sort of like we had that one class session where you all worked on questions for the midterm exam. I'm thinking about maybe having a discussion prompt or a discussion board prompt probably next week where you can pose questions that you'd like to see on the final exam, and that'll be something you can earn points for. All right, all that being said, let's go ahead and dive into our topic for this week. And next, we're going to be talking about our last major issues in studying pop culture this semester, and that is the rise of digital media, social media, the rise of internet based pop culture in the past 25 years or so. And I'm leading that off with two old favorites. These are two readings that I have relied upon quite a bit in the 10 years that I've been teaching classes like this one. And the reason I go back to them a lot is because I think they are always insightful and they always provide a very interesting perspective for thinking about how social media, how the internet is affecting all of us personally and all of us as a society, including reflected through our pop culture. So why don't we start with, I think the one to start with is called The Judgment of Thamus. This is written about 30 years ago by a guy named Neil Postman. And just to demonstrate what the essence of this is. I'm going to read from the opening part of the text for a quick minute here. The story of the Judgment of Thamus comes from based upon ancient writings by Plato. And it talks about a story where a god of invention visits the king of Egypt and shows off his new inventions. The god here, Teuth, has invented numbers, calculation, geometry, astronomy, and writing. He exhibits them to King Thamus, claiming that they should be made widely known and available to Egyptians. Thamus inquired into the use of each of them, and as Teuth went through them, expressed approval or disapproval according as he judged Teuth's claims to be well or ill founded. Thamus is reported to have said for and against each of Teuth's inventions, a lot of different things. But when it came to writing, Teuth, the god of invention, declared, "Here's an accomplishment, my lord the king, which will improve both the wisdom and the memory of the Egyptians. I have discovered a sure receipt for memory and wisdom." To this, Thamus replied, "Teuth, my paragon of inventors, the discoverer of an art is not the best judge of the good or harm which will accrue to those who practice it. And so it is in this. You who are the father of writing have, out of fondness for your offspring, attributed to it quite the opposite of its real function. Those who acquire it will cease to exercise their memory and become forgetful. They will rely on writing to bring things to their remembrance by external signs instead of by their own internal resources. What you have discovered is a receipt for recollection, not for memory." And as for wisdom, your pupils will have the reputation for it without the reality. They will receive a quantity of information without proper instruction, and in consequence be thought very knowledgeable when they are for the most part quite ignorant. And because they are filled with the conceit of wisdom instead of real wisdom, they will be a burden to society. That's the Judgment of Thamus. We go back to the origins of what the author calls intellectual technologies, tools that help us think in more efficient ways, communicate in more efficient ways. Writing itself, a fundamental part of human civilization, and by virtue of that, of popular culture. And the judgment here from King Thamus in ancient Egypt is that writing will not bring wisdom and memory to the people of Egypt, just the opposite. It will bring knowledge without wisdom, which leads to conceit, and it will bring recollection rather than true memory. And I always bring that up, and I wish we had an open forum to discuss this, because I always like asking, who do you think is right? And my students, and I'm sure you are already on that page, are thinking through their responses, and I usually get a pretty interestingly even split. Some people think Thamus had it right in his harsh judgment. Some people think Teuth had it right in his optimistic judgment. And I think many of us, weighing it in the balance, would point out, and Neil Postman says the same, they're both right. Going back to Neil Postman here, he says, Thamus's error is in believing that writing will be a burden to society and nothing but a burden. For all his wisdom, he fails to imagine what writing's benefits might be, which, as we know, have been considerable. We may learn from this that it is a mistake to suppose that any technological innovation has a one-sided effect. Every technology is both a burden and a blessing, not either or, but this and that. And that, to me, is one of the most insightful comments I think it's possible to have when it comes to assessing the internet and social media as it affects popular culture right now. There's always a benefit and a burden to new technologies, and the internet and social media are still new technologies. The internet first became commercially available in the United States in 1994, just over 25 years ago. Social media as we know it today, probably born about 2004 as Facebook became more and more popular. So 16 years ago, right? That's yesterday. That is nothing at all in the historical register, or even in the register of popular culture. And yet, in that time, the internet and social media have dramatically remade popular culture, how we think, how we relate, what the mirror shows us about ourselves. And I think that is something that's worth pondering a little bit. And that's one of the discussion board posts for this week. What are the benefits? What are the burdens that the internet and social media have produced in our society? There's a lot of upside. There's probably a lot of downside as well. What I want you to delve into in that discussion board post is listing out the upsides and the downsides. And it's worth noting, sometimes the same thing can be a benefit or a burden depending on the circumstance. One of my favorite ways of explaining this is to talk about how democratic, in many ways, small d democratic, the internet is. It is a place where every person is their own individual voice. They can find others that agree with them, and they can create a system that, or they can create a information sphere, I guess you would say, a bubble, as got called a lot a couple of years ago, that best reflects their particular experience, their friends, their outlook, these sorts of things. It is truly every person representing themselves accurately. Now, the flip side of that, it provides this platform that allows people to express themselves, these sorts of things, is that it also provides a free and open and powerful platform for people who spread, at best, bad ideas, at worst, bullshit, at worst, honestly, poisonous things. And like, not to politicize it too much, but like, God, the garbage from the past week of these protests about the lockdowns and trying to reopen the economy before the coronavirus, has been contained. I guarantee you a lot of the audience for those protests and a lot of what instigated people to those protests was social media, spreading things, viral tweets, uh, insane YouTube videos he sets to YouTube. And that is something we haven't accounted for yet. The freedom is an open democratic space, but it's also one that, by virtue of that, is perhaps dangerous. It's perhaps not in the public interest for it to be as wide open, for it to be as uh, I don't want to say maybe unregulated, but as consequence free, perhaps, as it might be. Similarly, the internet allows us to engage in long distance relationships. That's been a great benefit during the lockdown here. I'm sure all of us have enjoyed seeing friends and families through platforms like FaceTime, Zoom, Messenger chat, these sorts of things. But on the flip side, and this is maybe the other discussion board for this week, in fact, that creates a feedback loop that is potentially very maybe harmful in the worst cases. Um, uh, Researchers have asked college students over the past decade or so how if they are addicted to social media, and that's the sort of phrasing there that usually gets people to say, like, no, of course not, no, not even a little bit. Are you addicted to a thing? And but incredibly, many college students have said, "Oh yeah, no, I am addicted. It's terrible. If I don't use social media for longer than X amount of time, I feel like I'm tweaking out. I get jittery. I lose my concentration. I just feel bad." That's remarkable. And that's by design. Social media, by its design, is something that creates a positive feedback loop when you are sustained in it. The more you click, the more likes you get, the more retweets you have, the better you feel about yourself. You get that little push of what is the pleasure chemical? I think it's endorphins. You feel great chemically. You feel great when you are having a good time on social media, and then when you get withdrawn, well, you get withdrawal. Just I mean, not as acute as something like narcotics, but it is the same sort of chemical response in a lot of ways. So obviously, you know, that's bad. So again, that idea of benefits and burdens, and that other major reading for this week explores a sort of another avenue of this idea. Jumping right off Postman's article, the writer of "Is Google Making Us Stupid?" assesses the benefits and burdens that Google, the one-stop shop for information online, has on American society and American popular culture. And the author acknowledges he uses Google a lot. It's a great tool. It gets more accurate and more powerful with every passing month, and it is literally an information junkie's dream. You can find everything through Google's search engine and its related tools. But he does note that the ease of finding information through Google and the way that it prompts him to look for any information has changed the way his brain works. The author writes that he feels like it has become more difficult to read. He skims when he reads, bouncing from tab to tab or link to link. I think he uses the metaphor of jet skiing along the surface of this ocean of words, whereas prior to that, when he was reading in, say, textbooks, or being a lunatic and reading, say, a 1400 page long book about a unelected politician in New York. Been reading that one for a year. I'll finish it someday. It's very good. It's so long, and the Robert Moses fucking sucks. Sorry. That he notices essentially the old-fashioned book-based form of reading caused deeper thinking, contemplation, and reflection, whereas internet-based reading, he is finding it to be shallow. It flattens him out, pancake style. Uh, and I find that very interesting because I can identify with that to some degree. I got very bad at reading in the first couple of weeks of the lockdown because I no longer had the sort of internet free time that I was used to, essentially commuting. I try not to use my phone too much on the bus or the train, so that's time that's devoted to books that are too big. Looking at it on my desk here, and lacking that, I went a solid 2 weeks without finishing a book, and for me that's wandering 40 years in the desert, in terms of how much I expect to read. I had to retrain myself to put aside time and close my devices and eliminate other distractions, aka staying up after my kids have gone to bed, in order to finish the books that I wanted to complete. That is telling. The fact that I had to retrain myself to read because I was at home, I was surrounded by my computers, my phone, my video games. All of them are very easy, shallow distractions. And that prompted me to flatten my brain a little bit. I wonder if all of you have had similar experiences as well. There's another little bit in the article about Google that I think is really telling as well, though an odd one to talk about during the lockdown. He talks about how all intellectual technologies, those tools that help us think or communicate more easily, do have an impact on the way we think and act, both individually and socially, culturally. And he uses the example of the mechanical clock, which is invented in the late Middle Ages in Europe. Prior to that, if you wanted to know what time it was, you just had to rely on your own internal clock. Maybe you looked at the sun, maybe you had a sundial. There's different timekeeping methods. But the invention of the mechanical clock breaks the day into 24 hours, broken down into 60 minutes, broken down into 60 seconds. It divorces the concept of time from the physical lived reality of it. The time right now is 12:55. It is not. Uh, that is a very precise measurement. By contrast, without looking at the computer here, if you had asked me what time it was, I would have said, it's like a little after lunch-ish, something like that. Um, that's a much more imprecise, but maybe a more lived experience. And I think we can think about how the clock is more precise, maybe makes us be more precise or more regimented in a lot of very different, interesting ways. For example, do you wake up because of an alarm clock? If not for that clock telling you now is the time to be awake, would you be rising at that hour? Have there been moments where you know you have to be in class because the time on your phone, etc., is telling you, but nothing in your brain says, "Oh, I need to be in the classroom right now. I love it so much." Are there moments where you've been hungry, but it's not lunch time? Even just the fact, how is it 12:56? Where did that particular moment come from? And why is it 12:56 here and 1:56 100 miles away from us? The idea of time zones. All of these are artificial constructs built around the technologies that we use. The more we use an intellectual technology, the deeper an impact it has on our mindset, on how we think and how we live and how we relate to one another. And the fact that clocks can have that dramatic of an impact and we barely even think about it says a lot when you compare it to much more powerful tools like social media, like the internet, which are barely starting to influence popular culture, socially, globally, and individually. So those are the big ideas for you to toss around in the discussion board this week. I will see all of you in Zoom or in my emails in the meantime. Have a good one.